Camila walked with silent steps through the cold hallways of the F&R Corporation headquarters, as if her very presence needed permission just to exist. The worn-out heels, bought at a thrift store in the outskirts of town, clicked faintly against the smooth marble floor, unnoticed, exactly how she wanted it, or rather, how life had taught her to want it. Since childhood, Camila had been conditioned to shrink herself, to lower her gaze, to not take up too much space. Being black, poor, and called ugly by an entire school carved her childhood with a pain that didn't scream. It whispered, a silence that became her armor, still wrapped around her, even after earning a degree in executive secretariat and speaking 2 languages. No diploma or skill ever seemed enough when the world still judged her by the texture of her hair, the shade of her skin, or the simplicity of her clothes. And that's how she walked into that office every single day, swallowed by glass walls, invisible to eyes that only noticed expensive heels and flawless makeup. On the 32nd floor, glances weren't subtle. They were sharp, like blades. Whispered comments sliced like knives wrapped in designer perfume. She must have gotten in because of a quota, they muttered. With that hair? And those no-name clothes? They laughed. But Camila pressed on, breathing deep, eyes to the floor, flawless reports held tightly in her arms. She never replied, never retaliated. She preferred to win in silence rather than lose in a fight. She knew that for women like her, mistakes weighed more. A raised voice and she'd be hysterical. A stern look and she'd be aggressive. So, she swallowed the pain with the discreet elegance of someone who doesn't have the luxury to react. The position was executive assistant to the board. The salary was mediocre, but it was all she had, and she would protect it with teeth, nails, and excellence. She occupied the office closest to the executive wing, yet had never exchanged more than 3 sentences with the man behind the frosted glass door, Caio Ferraz, the CEO, the billionaire, the man whose beauty commanded respect across every inch of the company. White, tall, a body chiseled like stone, eyes of steel, and a voice cold as a final verdict. Female employees desired him in silence. Male employees feared him. Meetings with him were monosyllabic, his decisions final. There was an emptiness on his face, not just coldness. It was an old wound, hidden behind muscle and tailored suits. Caio lived as if no one deserved his trust, and perhaps he was right. Rumors said he had been betrayed and used by women who only sought him out for money. That's why he'd become what he was, a ruthless executive, a proud man, closed off, sexist, and untouchable. But Camila didn't fear him, nor did she admire him. She simply treated him with the objective respect any professional deserves. When he needed something, she delivered. When he ordered, she complied. No smiles, no flattery, no effort to please. To her, Caio was just another boss who would eventually go away, because everyone does. And she had learned early on that you can't count on anyone but yourself. It was that neutrality, that shielded way of existing, that, without her knowing, began to stir the heart of the most feared man in that building. One day, Camila arrived earlier than usual, a folder of revised contracts in hand. She had worked late the night before, and though exhaustion weighed under her eyes, her posture remained straight. As she walked through the empty corridors, her gaze crossed Caio's for the first time. Unintended, unprepared, a direct look, raw, from a man used to being feared, but who now found someone who looked back with nothing but respect and indifference. No awe, no worship. It was as if, for one fleeting second, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a man, and she, a woman who didn't bow down. That moment lasted 2 seconds, but it planted the first seed of a story neither of them could ever foresee. He kept walking, so did she, but something, however imperceptible, had shifted on that floor, and there would be no going back. The name Caio Ferraz was whispered in the company's back halls with the same caution one uses when speaking of an approaching storm. There was something about him that wasn't just power, it was presence, an elegant kind of threat, a beauty so sculptural that it intimidated more than it attracted. Female employees would quietly comment on his chiseled physique, which he maintained religiously during pre-dawn workouts, as if trying to sweat out all the pain trapped inside. The tailored shirts barely concealed the outline of his broad shoulders, tense arms, firm chest. But what truly froze the blood of those who crossed his path was his gaze. Cold, calculating, suspicious. Eyes of a man who no longer believed in anyone. Eyes of someone who had once loved and had been shattered for it. The full story was never told aloud, but everyone knew fragments of what had shaped him. Caio had fallen madly in love early in his career. A model, they said. Stunning, seductive, but hollow inside. She used him, stole his ideas, profited from his brilliance, and at the height of success, betrayed him with a business partner and left him publicly humiliated. From that day forward, the sensitive Caio died. In his place, the man who now ruled F&R with an iron fist was born. Since then, he had stopped believing in emotions. Love was weakness. Every woman, to him, was a recycled version of the same poison that once wounded him. He never got involved again, never trusted again, and his entire life now revolved around numbers, goals, contracts, and absolute control over everything and everyone. Inside his smoked glass office, Caio kept a strict daily ritual of absolute silence. Meetings with directors took place under pressure so thick it nearly suffocated the air. One mistake in a presentation and someone would leave crying or fired. He accepted no excuses. He never repeated himself. He didn't tolerate failure. He was the kind of boss who knew every tiny detail of each department, making even the smallest error feel like an unforgivable offense. Camilla's predecessor had quit from emotional exhaustion, but the current one, she seemed made of steel. Camila was a mystery to him. She executed everything with surgical precision, but never smiled or tried to get close, and slowly, that began to disturb him. Deep down, Caio missed something he couldn't quite name. It was as if Camilla's silence screamed truths no one else dared to speak. She never made small talk, never joined after-work events, never overdid her makeup, never tried to look attractive. She was just herself, pure, reserved, real, and that clashed with everything he had trained himself to despise. It didn't seem possible that women like her still existed. Women who didn't crave his money or power, who didn't melt at the sight of his muscles, his steel grey eyes, or his name on business magazine covers. Camila was like an ethical fortress, and it was beginning to shake his world. One ordinary morning, he dropped an envelope containing important documents. A silly mistake, rare, almost childish. Camila, who happened to be nearby, bent down to pick it up. Their fingers brushed for a second. He looked into her eyes, and she looked away, as if nothing had happened, as if that moment meant nothing, as if he, Caio Ferraz, billionaire and desired, was no different than any ordinary man. It stung. For the first time in years, someone treated him with such genuine indifference, it felt like disdain, and he didn't know how to deal with that. That was the day Caio truly began to notice Camila, not just as an employee, but as a woman, as a human being. He observed her schedule, her habits, her flawless reports, her almost poetic way of remaining invisible without ever failing. That was strength, that was bravery. And though he wouldn't admit it, he began to feel, first, anger, then curiosity, and finally, a quiet unease in his chest, a flicker, something that felt like hope, but it was still too early, and Caio wasn't ready to let the armor fall. Camila never knew the impact she caused by simply existing in that calm, correct, and impermeable way, untouched by the games of power. While so many other secretaries over the years tried to stand out with rehearsed smiles, subtle necklines, or forced compliments, she did the opposite. She clung to her ethical and professional posture as if holding a crucifix in the middle of a fire. She never let emotion slip through her expressions, never gave in to the impulse to seem overly pleasant, because she knew any step outside the line would be used against her. For being a woman, for being black, for coming from where she came from. That's why Camila had built an invisible wall around herself, and that wall was made of flawless work, respectful silence, and an unshakable code of ethics that to the most observant eyes made her seem almost inhuman. But to Caio, that inhumanity was in fact the most human stance of all. In her, he saw something he hadn't seen in anyone in a long time: authenticity. In the early days, it irritated him. In the following weeks, it intrigued him, and now it was beginning to truly unsettle him. There was something wrong with this woman, he thought. No one could be so immune to him. Did she not find him attractive? Did she not know who he was? Or was she pretending not to care just to get his attention? The doubt gnawed at him, and the more she ignored him, the more he observed her. Camila was different, and that alone was enough to send his emotional routine into collapse. Caio began to notice the smallest details. The way she adjusted her hair discreetly before walking into his office. The way she typed with surgical precision. How she responded to emails with politeness and efficiency, without unnecessary adjectives. How she never joined in the gossip at the cafeteria or in the elevators. It was as if she was always in another world, a world where he, the all-powerful CEO, simply didn't exist. And that exclusion was unbearable for a man used to being the gravitational center of all attention. But there was more, much more. Camila wasn't just ethical, she was intelligent. In silence, she had saved a multi-million-dollar project by spotting an error in a contract clause that none of the lawyers had noticed. She passed along the correction by email, unsigned, without asking for credit. When Caio saw the fix and found out who had made it, he was hit hard. That woman, invisible, overlooked, rejected by the hallways of the elite, had saved an international operation without even wanting recognition. That shattered something inside him, because she didn't behave like all the others. She didn't ask for a raise. She didn't try to climb through flattery. She didn't try to seduce him. She simply did what was right, and for him, that was a deeply unsettling novelty. One night, Caio stayed late at the office. The city below was just a sea of lights, and silence filled the space like fog. He was exhausted, mentally, emotionally. The ghosts of his past whispered in his head. The betrayals, the exposure, the media's ridicule, the women who used his name as a springboard. All of it returned like a silent avalanche when he was alone. And that night, by chance, Camila had also stayed to organize documents for an international client. Without makeup, her face tired but her posture intact. He saw her from afar, through the glass. She didn't notice. She was absorbed in her task, eyes glowing before the screen. And in that moment, Caio felt something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. It wasn't desire. Not yet. It was something deeper. A rare kind of admiration. He saw in her the strength the world had stolen from him. He saw the opposite of everything that had hurt him. He saw a mirror image of himself, reversed. She had been hurt too, but she hadn't shut down. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't turn to stone. She remained human, honest, steadfast, impeccable. And that realization disoriented him from the inside out. In the following days, he tried to provoke her in subtle ways. He assigned difficult tasks at the last minute, sent curt messages, hoped to see her lose composure, hoped to see her make a mistake, but she didn't crack. She responded with precision, delivered everything ahead of schedule, didn't cry, didn't snap. And so, without knowing it, Camila was breaking through every layer of Caio's fortress, not with sweet words, but with the silent dignity of someone who has never been truly loved and still chooses to love the world with honesty. It was on a Thursday morning, when the sky was still covered by a fine mist rising from the skyscrapers of São Paulo, that the first real gaze between Camila and Caio happened. And it wasn't one of those routine, fleeting glances void of intention. It was something denser, heavier, almost inappropriate. A crossing of eyes that seemed to freeze time and turn that office hallway into a kind of emotional battlefield where no word was spoken, but an entire war was silently waged. Camila was carrying a box of documents and nearly collided with Caio at the turn of the meeting room. He was coming down the corridor in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, no blazer, revealing sculpted arms and a tense expression after a call with Asian investors. She was startled. So was he. But what happened in the following seconds remained suspended between them like an indecipherable secret. Caio's eyes landed directly on hers. Dark, deep, unwavering. For the first time, he truly saw them, and something inside him trembled, because there was no fear there, no flattery, no desire. What he saw was pride. A woman who looked him in the eyes with dignity, without trying to impress him, without wanting anything. It was as if Camila was saying, without moving her lips, "I see who you are, and I'm not afraid." And that kind of gaze, Caio was not used to receiving, especially not from a woman like her, someone who, according to everyone around him, he should ignore. But in that second, there was no hierarchy, no status, only two human beings, equally broken, equally proud, trying to hide from themselves. Camila felt her heart race, but didn't show it. She looked away and kept walking as if nothing had happened, but something inside her had begun to stir, a subtle restlessness, a sweet discomfort, because she too saw him differently that day, not as the arrogant, billionaire, muscular, untouchable boss, but as a tired man, a man who was pretending too much, who hardened everything around him so he wouldn't have to show that, inside, he might be in ruins. And that glimpse, that microsecond in which she saw pain in his eyes, cracked her armor. Camila was not a woman prone to quick passions, but she wasn't blind either. And recognizing a wounded heart is something people who've suffered too much learn to do almost by instinct. Caio, in turn, couldn't regain his rhythm. He sat in the meeting room and stared through the glass for long minutes, replaying that exchange of glances as if he'd been touched by something dangerous. And it was dangerous, because for the first time in a long while, he saw someone who didn't want to win him over, but who truly saw him. And that kind of encounter is the most threatening of all. He spent the rest of the day restless, opening reports without absorbing them, answering emails impatiently. Every time he looked at the clock, he felt an urge to see her again, to walk down that hallway once more, to trigger another collision of eyes. But he couldn't, he shouldn't, because if he let his heart get involved again, he knew the cost. At the end of the workday, Camila stopped by his office to deliver a signed report. She knocked, heard the dry "come in," and entered. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, gazing at the city. When he turned around, their eyes met again, and there it was, that tense moment once more. She extended the paper without saying a word. He took it. Their fingers nearly touched, and the silence hung between them like an unspoken prayer. Caio swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. He felt like asking something stupid, like, "Have you had dinner?" just to prolong the moment. But he said nothing, and she left, without looking back. That night, Camila went home with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a flicker of curiosity, of danger, as if she were playing with fire and hadn't yet realized just how badly she could get burned. And Caio, from the heights of his empire, felt, for the first time in years, fear. Fear of someone seeing what he had hidden the most, his heart. It was a Monday like any other, packed with exhausting meetings, phone calls in multiple languages, and the relentless pressure from shareholders in New York, demanding returns from the last quarter. The company buzzed with stress and chaos, but inside that glass and concrete fortress called F&R Corporation, something much quieter and far more dangerous was happening. Something no chart could predict. The heart of Caio Ferraz was beginning to crack, and all because of a woman who wasn't even trying. Her, of all people, Camila, the invisible secretary, the flawless professional, the woman he couldn't read, predict, or control. And it was on that seemingly ordinary day that, for the first time, Caio's mask of coldness slipped, even if only for a brief instant, but it was enough for her to see and never forget. The building suffered a sudden power outage after a short circuit in the central system. For safety, all elevators stopped, and it took several minutes for the generators to restore the lights. During that temporary darkness, only a few areas remained lit, including the executive office, where Camila happened to be with a folder of contracts to review. The silence, broken only by emergency beeps, created an almost cinematic atmosphere. Camila stood waiting for the lights to return when Caio rushed in, drenched from the rain after returning from the garage with a soaked car. When the door closed behind him, he found himself locked in there with her, under the dim glow of emergency lighting. The tension in the air was palpable. He pulled off his wet blazer with a swift motion, revealing a white shirt clinging to his body, outlining every muscle. But at that moment, Camila wasn't looking at the body. There was something in his face, something vulnerable, worn out, almost too human. Caio's eyes had lost their usual arrogant glint. He looked exhausted and lost, a man at the edge of his own hardness, forced to face someone who didn't see him merely as a boss. She remained still, holding the folder, and he, looking at her, lowered his eyes for a moment. For the first time, he looked down, and in that tiny gesture, everything was said without words. "Is that for me?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Yes," she replied, steady but gentle. "You can leave it there," he added, yet didn't move. He stood still, looking at her like someone searching for something in a mirror, like someone seeing a person who didn't treat him like a billionaire, a myth, or a trophy, just a man, someone who could also fail. Camila stepped forward, placed the folder on the desk, and turned to leave, but he spoke again in a softer, more exposed tone. "How do you do it?" She paused, uncertain. "Do what?" "Stay calm. Be so strong, even with everything they do to you." Camila took a deep breath. For a moment, she faltered. Her eyes welled up without her consent, but she controlled it. As always, she turned her face away and said, "Because if I'm not strong, no one will be strong for me." And she smiled. A small, painful, sincere smile. A smile that shattered the wall Caio had spent years building. Because right then, in that exact instant, he saw Camila's beauty for the first time. It wasn't the obvious kind. It didn't come from lipstick or long lashes. It was a beauty of soul, of scar, of someone who fought hard just to remain standing. And that dismantled something inside him. And he, without thinking, smiled back. A shy, almost boyish smile. A smile no one in that company had ever seen from him. But Camila saw it, and it startled her. She left the room quickly, her heart racing. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. And Caio, alone, sat in the chair and ran his hands over his face, like someone trying to erase what they just felt. But he couldn't, because there was something about her that touched him in a way no one else ever had. Because that day, even without saying, "I see you," she did. And he let himself be seen. After that day, something began to change inside the president's office at F&R. But what surprised Caio the most was that the change wasn't coming from Camila. She remained exactly the same, impeccable, unshakable, untouchable. And that was precisely what began to drive him insane. The exchange of looks during the blackout, her restrained smile, her words, they all echoed in his mind for days. And he, who was used to winning over any woman with the raise of an eyebrow or a well-placed phrase, now found himself up against a wall that wouldn't yield, wouldn't crack, wouldn't respond. A woman who treated him like just another human being, completely indifferent to his billions, his athletic body, or the power he held over the entire building. Camila was, at once, the greatest temptation and the greatest frustration he had ever faced. He began to test her limits, almost like an insecure boy trying to find out if he was being noticed. He started calling her more often, requesting more face-to-face meetings, assigning urgent tasks outside office hours, all just to create excuses to watch her up close. But Camila didn't waver. She answered in the same neutral, polite tone, completed everything with flawless precision, never late, never smiled more than necessary, never gave in. And it was that constancy that disarmed him, because there was no game, no tactic, no opening. And Caio was used to openings. Women who laughed too loudly, who approached with silly questions, who accidentally brushed past him in the halls or left little notes dressed up as professionalism. But Camila was silence and posture, the absence of vanity, resistance. Inside herself, Camila fought a different battle. She knew exactly what was happening. She felt the weight of his gaze as she crossed the halls, the silence before he entered a room, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. And though it stirred her heart, it also terrified her, because Camila knew what it meant to get involved with someone like Caio. The risk wasn't just emotional. It was social, structural, historical. She knew that if anything between them ever became public, people wouldn't see a love story. They'd see an offense. She'd be accused of scheming, of seduction, of climbing the ladder with her body. and she couldn't endure another episode of public humiliation. That's why she armored herself. That's why she was cold, not out of pride, but out of survival. She spoke to herself in the mirror, practiced neutral replies, watched her posture, rehearsed ways to decline invitations that hadn't even been made yet. Because deep down, Camila knew that Caio Ferraz was changing because of her. And that was dangerous, because when a man like him changes, the entire universe around him starts to shift, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to survive the quake that would follow. So, she resisted, every day, in silence, with grace, with professionalism, and with a heart that hurt more and more for having to say no to something she might, deep down, want to say yes to. Caio began losing control over his own emotions. One day, he even went so far as to ask Camila if she wanted coffee. He would fetch it himself from the break room. She declined, as always, with a "thank you, sir," that shattered him inside. Another day, he tried starting a conversation about a book he saw on her desk. She answered politely, but didn't continue the exchange, as if she knew that every extra word was a risk too costly to take. And he kept falling, not for a body, not for a smile, but for that woman who, unlike all the others, wasn't trying to win him over, and was therefore conquering him even more. And then, one evening, as he left the office, Caio saw her on the sidewalk, waiting for the bus. Worn-out heels, an old overcoat, a bag slung over her arm, alone. No one would guess that this woman held up the presidency of the company from behind the scenes, that she was the one organizing multi-million-dollar contracts, mediating meetings, calming directors, preventing lawsuits. No one saw her, except him, and for the first time, Caio felt shame. Shame for never offering her a ride, for expecting her to notice him when he had never once asked if she needed anything. And there, on that cold sidewalk, watching Camila board a crowded bus alone, Caio knew with absolute certainty he wanted her, not out of whim, not out of lust, but because he needed her to remind him of who he used to be before he turned to stone. But she would resist, and she would resist until the very last second, because for Camila, loving a man like Caio would only be possible if he learned how to love her the right way, without control, without vanity, without domination, with surrender, with equality, with truth. That woman, who until recently had been just another functional presence in the company's corridors, now consumed the thoughts of the most impenetrable man in the city. Camila had become, without even knowing it, a silent obsession. And the most frightening part was that Caio didn't understand how it had happened. He, who had always had everything and everyone at his feet, now found himself hostage to a feeling he couldn't control, couldn't name, one that wasn't desire in the usual carnal sense, or at least, not just that. It was something deeper, more visceral, a kind of unrest that turned into frustration every time she ignored him with the same unshakable politeness as always. And that cycle began to consume him. He, who could predict the behavior of everyone around him, now felt lost before a woman who seemed immune to every advance. So Caio began to act. He tried to flip the script. Subtly, of course. His pride would never allow him to show he cared. But everything in him started screaming for her attention. He began appearing in the hallways more often, as if, by chance, crossing paths with her. Started adjusting meeting schedules so she'd accompany him on external appointments. Sent brief emails just to get a response from her. Even began showing up more often at the office pantry, knowing she always passed by after lunch for her chamomile tea. But Camila, with emotional wisdom forged in pain, noticed everything. And instead of melting, she hardened even more. She knew it was a test. She knew he was trying to bend her, and she would not be bent. Caio's behavior started to raise eyebrows. The team noticed he was more impatient, more distracted, more impulsive during meetings. Some directors began whispering that the president was acting different, but no one dared to speculate openly. After all, who would dare suggest that the CEO was interested in that secretary no one respected, that black, poor woman with no influential last name, no conventional beauty, no international resume? It was unthinkable, and for that very reason, dangerously real. Because the kind of love no one believes in is the truest of all. One day, Caio arrived with a bag from the city's most sophisticated bookstore. He left it on her desk without a word. Inside was a rare edition from a contemporary African author, the same one she had mentioned in a brief conversation weeks earlier, a conversation she had forgotten, but one he couldn't. Camila read the discreet handwritten dedication, for those who still read with the heart. It was the first time something that personal had crossed the barrier between them. She looked at him. He held her gaze. It was a silent request, a signal, an attempt. But Camila simply closed the book gently and said, in a firm tone, "I appreciate it, sir, but I can't accept personal gifts in a professional setting," and handed it back. No anger, no rudeness, just the strength of someone who knows that giving in too early could cost everything. Caio felt like he'd been punched in the chest, but he also felt admiration, because she wasn't like the others, because once again, she proved she wasn't for sale, and that made him want her even more. In the following days, he tried everything, invited her to accompany him on a business trip. She declined, saying another assistant could represent him. Tried to strike up a conversation at a corporate dinner. She stayed distant, choosing instead to sit with the rest of the staff. He sent anonymous flowers. Camila left them at reception. He was losing control, and the more he lost, the more he wanted, the deeper he fell, not for a body, but for character. And then he began to truly change, started listening more, became less harsh with his team, publicly praised accomplishments he would have once ignored. All of it because Camila, without saying a word, was teaching him. With her behavior, her ethics, her unwavering dignity, she was teaching him to be a better man, to see beyond appearances, to feel beyond pride, to truly love. Camila, meanwhile, began to doubt her own resistance. At night, she lay down with her heart racing. She read his gestures, felt the weight of his transformation, but she still couldn't trust, still couldn't allow herself, because the world was cruel to women like her. And if that love wasn't real, she would be shattered again, and that she could not survive. True love, when it begins to bloom between worlds so different, doesn't grow in silence. It attracts the noise of the envious, the venom of malicious eyes, and the cruel judgment of those who cannot stand to see the improbable become real. And that's exactly what spread through the glass and concrete hallways of F&R. A rising murmur, a constant whisper, a scandal without evidence, but filled with fabricated certainty. It started discreetly, small comments, stifled laughter, but soon it became unbearable. Have you seen how he keeps calling her for everything now? She's definitely taking advantage. Bet she's just another one after his money. Can you imagine him with her? And the word her came laced with disdain, as if the mere fact that Camila existed was offensive to the unspoken rules of that elitist world. The prejudice didn't come only through words. It dripped from glances, from tones of voice, from absence. Camila began to be ignored at group coffee breaks, at team lunches, at invitations to company social events. The smiles vanished. Her colleagues, especially those who had spent years trying and failing to get Caio's attention, began treating her with disdain, with sarcasm disguised as formality. The men whispered behind her back, and the cruelest part of all, no one said anything to her directly, because they knew that if confronted, they could hide behind professionalism. It was a silent attack, like a cold breeze cutting through bone. Camila endured, held her head high, did her work with even greater excellence, but inside, she bled. It hurt to see that even after so much effort, she was still treated as a body out of place, as if she could never belong to that space, that level, that man. It wasn't just about work, it was about race, about origin, about beauty, about standards she never tried to fit into, but that now suffocated her. She didn't have implants, didn't wear designer heels, didn't get facial harmonization. And in that world, that was almost heresy. More than falling in love with her, what people couldn't stand was watching Caio, the untouchable, the unreachable, look at someone like her with both desire and respect. Caio noticed. He saw the sideways glances, heard the hushed rumors, but for a long time, did nothing. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride, maybe because he still wasn't sure what he felt. But his silence hurt her more than any gossip, because even if he was in the process of changing, he was still a prisoner of his own status, still cared about what people would say, still hesitated. And Camila, who had carried the weight of the world on her back since childhood, couldn't carry his silence too. She couldn't be the victim of incomplete love. Things got worse when photos were leaked from a corporate event where the two appeared in the same frame, with Caio casting a very particular look, his look, at Camila. The image went viral within the company's internal chat group, accompanied by cruel captions and racist jokes. CEO and his new cleaning lady, read one. Now I get why the meetings take so long, read another. Camila received the screenshots on her phone from a sympathetic intern, her eyes heavy with guilt. And in that instant, the ground crumbled beneath her feet. She went to the bathroom and cried like she hadn't in years, silently, alone, with the pain of someone who is judged simply for existing. The next day, she arrived at work with red eyes, but perfect posture, delivered all the reports, organized all the agendas, and when Caio passed her by and said, "Good morning," in a softer voice than usual, she merely nodded. No smile, no warmth. Because for her, being loved in silence wasn't enough. She wanted to be respected in public, and he wasn't ready for that yet. But something changed in him that day. When he found out about the group, when he saw the comments, when he read every one of those messages, his blood boiled. For the first time in years, Caio lost control, not with Camila, but with the world around him. He ordered an internal investigation, fired 2 directors, called an emergency meeting on ethics and respect, and for the first time, he used his power not to intimidate, but to protect. But for Camila, it wasn't enough anymore, because true love isn't shielding someone after the damage is done, it's making sure the damage never happens. And from that day on, she began to wonder if that love, as real as it may be, was worth the price of so much pain. If the halls of F&R Corporation had already become a minefield of prejudice and envy, what was coming next would be even more cruel, because this time, the judgment wouldn't come from colleagues, but from blood. Caio's family, traditional, elitist, and heirs to an empire built over generations on appearances and social alliances, was not ready to accept what now seemed inevitable: the involvement of their most promising heir with a woman who represented everything they had silently learned to despise. All it took was a gossipy cousin's remark, a poorly interpreted photo at a corporate dinner, and the whisper turned into alarm. Camila, the woman who held a mere executive assistant position, was now seen as a direct threat to the purity of the Ferraz legacy. The first moves were veiled. Caio's mother, Fernanda Ferraz, called him on a Sunday morning with a falsely casual tone. She asked about work, praised his recent Forbes interview, and then dropped it. "I heard you've been quite close to that employee. Camila, isn't it?" Caio's silence was all the answer she needed. Fernanda continued, her voice velvet smooth, trained in emotional manipulation. "You know it's not about color, my son. It's about position, about compatibility, about preserving structure." And then she added, without taking a breath, "Imagine what people will say. A Ferraz with a woman no one knows, without pedigree, without a last name. You don't need that." But he did. Exactly that. Someone who saw him without the filters of fortune, image, or status. And for the first time in years, Caio felt ashamed of his upbringing. But he said nothing, because to face his mother was to face an entire empire. And despite being a billionaire, there was still a little boy inside him asking for permission to breathe. The family's offensive escalated. A dinner was organized under the guise of reconnection, and Camila was directly invited, a polite yet trap-laden gesture. Caio tried to convince her not to go, but she, firm as ever, chose to confront it. "If they have opinions about me, I'd rather hear them looking them in the eyes." And she went, dressed in a simple, elegant dress, hair tied back, subtle makeup. She didn't want to impress. She wanted to be who she always was, and that choice, though brave, would come at a price. The reception was cold, chilly greetings, evaluating stares, soulless smiles. During dinner, uncomfortable questions were asked with fake politeness. Where did you study again? Are your parents still around? Do you plan on working? Or are other plans already in place? Camila answered with dignity, without lowering her eyes, but each word felt like a dagger. The message was clear. She was not welcome. She was a foreign body in a dynasty of perfect facades. And the worst part was seeing Caio there, silent, trying to deflect the attacks with neutral phrases, avoiding confrontation. That hurt her more than anything anyone said. At the end of the evening, as they were leaving, Fernanda approached Camila in a theatrical gesture. She touched her arm and whispered with ice in her tone, "You're a smart woman, dear. You know you're tampering with something far bigger than you." Camila just smiled, but inside, she crumbled. In the car, she said nothing. Caio tried to explain, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that his mother's just difficult, but she didn't want to hear it, because it wasn't just a bad night. It was the certainty that even if he loved her, he still didn't have the courage to take a stand. The following week, the pressure intensified. The family began pushing shareholders, implying Camila was influencing decisions, that she could tarnish the company's image. An uncle even suggested she be transferred. Fernanda called the presidency, demanding her dismissal. That's when Caio finally snapped. He gathered the board, declared that if anyone laid a hand on her, he would resign from the presidency. That Camila was the most competent employee the company ever had, that she was the only person he truly trusted, and that if she left, he would leave too. It was his first real act of courage. But for Camila, it was already too late. She felt that despite the gesture, the pain of humiliation had left deep marks. She never wanted to be someone's secret love, never wanted to be an exception in anyone's life. She wanted to be a choice, not a challenge. And what stood between them now was an abyss carved by years of prejudice that wouldn't be filled with an emergency board meeting. Camila continued working, with the same excellence, but the light in her eyes had dimmed. The weariness was more visible, the silence deeper, and Caio was beginning to understand in pain that love that isn't defended with courage cannot survive the weight of the world. Everything seemed to be back under control. The routine returned to its rhythm, the atmosphere grew quieter, and Camila, though more distant, maintained her usual firmness, working with the same flawless precision. But that silence, it was just the calm before the storm, a storm that had been planned, designed coldly by those who still couldn't accept the idea of seeing a woman like her, black, simple, and unconnected, standing so close to the most powerful man in the company. The humiliation that was coming would not be an accident. It would be surgical, painful, public, and final. It was the ultimate strike of an elite wounded in pride, and above all, terrified by the power of love. Fernanda Ferraz, after realizing that Caio would no longer give in to internal pressure, decided to act on her own. She organized a high-end charity gala, packed with politicians, international investors, journalists, and top-tier executives. The invitation was sent to the entire F&R board, and with deliberate malice, Camila's name was included among the guests. Caio hesitated, tried to convince her not to go, said his mother might have hidden intentions, but Camila, wounded and tired of running, responded firmly, "If I hide, I'm confirming everything they think of me." And she went, wore her best dress, styled her hair with care, and went, not to please, but to prove she belonged there, that she deserved that space just as much as anyone. Her entrance was a cruel spectacle. Camila arrived alone. Everyone looked at her as if a cleaning lady had walked into an art auction, but she met each stare with the dignity of someone who had faced far worse. Caio saw her from across the room, lost his breath, and walked over. He gently took her hand and introduced her, for the first time in public, as the most intelligent and admirable woman I know. It was enough to crack the fake smiles all around them. No one there was prepared for that, and revenge came quickly. During dinner, Fernanda stood to give a speech. She spoke of meritocracy, tradition, family, and the value of institutional image. Her eyes remained fixed on Camila, every word a veiled arrow. And then, as if by accident, an image appeared on the large screen, a grotesque edit of Camila overlaid with distorted quotes taken from her internal emails, manipulated to sound as though she had insulted the company, its employees, and especially the Ferraz family. It was clearly a setup, but the scandal had already erupted. The entire room froze. Smiles vanished. Whispers erupted. Camila stared at the screen, confused, then looked at Caio, and he, in one eternal second, hesitated. And in that second, everything collapsed. She stood, tried to explain, said it was fake, that she hadn't written those things, but no one listened. No one wanted to. Her voice was drowned out by whispers, by accusing eyes, and Caio remained standing, speechless, not knowing what to do. The man who claimed to admire her, to love her, didn't defend her. Again, his silence was the final blow. Camila left the hall with burning eyes, but without shedding a single tear. She walked to the street, steps hard, trying to breathe, trying to understand how someone who seemed so different had been just like all the others. Caio caught up to her in the parking lot, tried to explain, said he was caught off guard, that he needed to verify the image before speaking. But she cut him off with a sentence that crushed him inside. You only needed to say, I believe her, and turned her back. That night, Camila cried until her body ached. She felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. She felt the weight of every moment she had been invisible, discredited, rejected. But now it wasn't because she was poor. It wasn't because she was black. It was because she had trusted, because she had believed, just once, that maybe it would be different. The next day, she resigned, handed in her letter without tears, without drama, only with the absolute silence of someone who had learned not to beg for a place anywhere. And she left, with her head high, but with her heart in ruins. Caio stood in his office, holding that letter like he was holding the shattered pieces of himself, and for the first time, he felt the real weight of losing someone who could never be replaced. The silence that took over the 32nd floor after Camila's departure was unlike any other. It wasn't the silence of routine, of focus, or of bureaucracy. It was a silence that hurt. That echoed. That vibrated against the glass walls like a ghost no one could name. But everyone could feel. Her absence wasn't just physical. It was emotional, moral, structural. Because Camila, with her quiet strength and unwavering integrity, held up far more than Caio's calendar. She held up the sense of justice, the balance, the humanity that still lingered in that company suffocated by power. And now, with her gone, everything felt grayer, shallower, colder. Caio didn't react right away. He just took the letter, read it, and filed it away. His eyes didn't shed tears, but inside, he was shattered. He spent the night at the office, answered no calls, didn't go home, just sat there, staring at the chair she used to sit in, next to the cup of chamomile tea and that ever-serene expression. He missed even the way she didn't smile at him, because even her silence was full of meaning. Caio was in ruins, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to lose not a thing, but someone. Someone who had been, without even saying it, the truest thing in his life. In the days that followed, he tried to pretend nothing had happened, attended meetings, signed contracts, took trips, smiled for cameras, but it was all hollow. Life returned to normal, but he was no longer the same. He started going through her emails just to reread old messages, kept a forgotten pen on her desk like it was a relic, tried to rehire her, offered double the salary, a new title, a hand-picked team. But Camila declined, politely, by email. No greeting, no farewell, just the professionalism of someone who no longer wanted to care. Camila, for her part, had gone inward, spent days locked away, ignoring calls. She was hurt in a way that made even sunlight painful. She felt anger, but above all, she felt grief, because what she lost wasn't just a job, it was the hope that the world could change. It was the rare belief that someone could truly see her and still choose to stay. But Caio didn't stay. In the moment she needed him most, he hesitated. And that she couldn't forget. Not yet. Maybe never. The press was merciless. Gossip sites speculated about her departure. Rumors of scandal, manipulation, blackmail. One headline read, "The untouchable billionaire's latest blunder." Another, "Camila, the woman who almost brought down the Ferraz empire." None of them told the truth. None spoke of racism, of pain, of her strength, but she didn't respond. Because she didn't owe anyone an explanation. Her silence was her weapon, her dignity, her revenge. Deep down, though, Camila still thought of him. She wished she didn't, but she did. She remembered the glances, the almost words, the gentle gestures, the fleeting moments of vulnerability. She thought about the man she believed lived behind all that coldness, wondered if he was still in there, trapped, trying to emerge. But it was too late, at least for now. Caio now spent his nights staring at his phone, wanting to write something, but everything felt too small, too weak, too false. How do you ask forgiveness for not defending the person you love? How do you ask for another chance when you yourself killed the first one? And so, two hearts remained broken, torn apart by pain, by pride, by the invisible walls of a world that, even in the 21st century, still tries to decide who can and who cannot be loved. But fate, when it comes to true love, never ends with a period, only with commas. Months passed, the seasons changed, leaves fell, and the city breathed new air. But inside Camila, the pain still gasped for breath. She had distanced herself from everything, from the company, from the memories, from Caio. She needed to find herself again, needed to rebuild from the shards that remained, not only the damage he had caused, but the weight that life had always placed upon her. Camila knew pain doesn't heal with time. It heals with choice. And she chose to be reborn, not out of revenge, not to prove a point, but out of self-love, for the woman still alive inside her, hidden beneath the rubble of prejudice, rejection, and invisibility. And so began, silently, her transformation. The first change was internal. Camila started therapy. For the first time in her life, she said out loud the traumas of childhood, the insults at school, the judgmental stares in elevators, the men who never truly chose her. The invitations declined out of fear of not being enough. She cried, she screamed, she went silent. And after each session, she returned more whole, stronger, more aware that the beauty denied to her was never missing from her skin. It had always been absent in the wrong eyes of those who looked at her. And now she was determined to change the reflection the world saw. Not for them, but for herself. She rebuilt her wardrobe. Not to fit into trends, but to reveal the strength she'd always carried. Chose clothes that made her feel commanding, radiant, alive. Went to the salon, cared for her hair with tenderness, wore her curls like a crown. She exercised, not to lose weight, but to feel grounded in her own body. She began applying makeup softly, as if sketching respect into each line. Every small gesture became an act of rebirth. Camila didn't want to become someone else. She simply wanted to be seen, at last, as the incredible woman she had always been. And when the world began to notice her, the gazes on the street, the invitations to speak, the genuine compliments, she did not bow. She held her gaze, kept her smile subtle, stood tall with her soul, because now she knew her worth, and no outside validation could ever outweigh the truth in her own reflection. Professionally, she soared, founded a consulting firm specialized in ethical team management. She started with just 2 clients, but her name spread fast. Soon, she was invited to speak at conferences, to advise startups, to lead diversity initiatives. Her resume now carried a prestige that no designer brand could buy. She became a symbol, a reference, a voice, yet she remained grounded, shaped by humble roots, but with a poise that would never again bend to disrespect. Meanwhile, at the top of his empire, Caio watched everything from afar. He saw headlines about Camila's rise, read articles with her name, watched an interview where she, without ever mentioning him, spoke about the importance of being respected, publicly. Every word was a mirror, every sentence a reopened scar, and seeing her so radiant, so powerful, so fully alive, he realized her love had transformed him too. But he had taken too long to deserve her. Camila knew she still loved him. That wasn't something that simply faded, but she also knew that now, to win her back, he would have to do far more than reach out. He would have to change, truly change. He would have to prove in front of everyone that he finally saw her, not as an exception, not as a mistake, not as a challenge, but as a woman, a partner, an equal. And until that happened, she would keep walking forward, head held high, no longer the secretary in worn-out heels, but the woman who survived scorn, conquered prejudice, and rose again, radiant, whole, and entirely her own. It was a sunny afternoon, ordinary to the eyes of the city, yet heavy with a silent, almost prophetic tension. Camila had been invited to speak at a corporate leadership event focused on equity and transformation, the kind of space that just months ago she could have never imagined herself in. The venue was luxurious and modern, filled with high-level executives, journalists, and investors eager to hear voices rising from beyond the usual elite circles. And Camila, in a dark blue, elegantly cut dress, her hair framing her face like a work of art, entered that room, as if the world, finally, had shifted into its rightful orbit. Her presence was calm, commanding, powerful, and as everyone fell silent to hear her speak, he appeared, Caio Ferraz, wearing a flawless suit, as always. But his eyes, they were different. In them, there was a collision of regret, admiration, and a desperation barely restrained. He hadn't expected to see her there. A colleague had invited him at the last minute, and when he saw her name on the event program, he didn't think twice. He went, because he knew this might be his only chance to see her again, to look into her eyes and find out if there was anything left, a trace, a possibility, a place where forgiveness might still breathe. Camila saw him from across the room, didn't flinch. She simply took a deep breath, maintained her poise, and stepped onto the stage. And under those lights, she did not falter. She spoke firmly about ethics, empathy, and the role of leadership in times of transformation. But it was at the end of her talk, during the open Q&A, that destiny made its final move. Caio raised his hand, and the entire room turned. Some recognized him, others simply felt the gravity of his presence. And when he took the microphone, the entire hall held its breath. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice softer than usual, almost shy. "Your talk was brilliant, thank you." Camila nodded, said nothing. "I wanted to ask," he continued, voice dry, "what does it take for a leader to acknowledge his own mistakes?" Silence. She could have answered with sarcasm, with coldness, with disdain. But she chose truth. Real recognition begins with exposure. It's not enough to change on the inside. You have to change on the outside too, with actions, with sacrifice, with public stance. Then, locking eyes with him, she added, and above all, with courage. Her answer dropped like a confession left unsaid. Everyone there felt it, but no one dared to interrupt. Caio only lowered his gaze, swallowing his pride and his shame. And at that moment, in front of an entire audience, it wasn't the billionaire who stood there. It was the man who finally understood the magnitude of the love he lost. After the event, Camila went to the lobby to call a car. He was already waiting, leaning quietly against a column. He didn't try to corner her. He just waited. When she walked past, he spoke. "I've changed, but I understand that maybe now it's not enough." She stopped, took a breath, looked at him with restrained tenderness. "I'm not the same woman anymore. I know, but who you are now is even more incredible than before." There was silence, suspended time. He extended an envelope. "If one day you ever want to know, it's all here." It was a letter, handwritten, full of apologies, full of feelings. She took it, kept it, made no promises, but she didn't reject it either, and walked away. Caio stayed there, watching her leave again, but this time, holding on to hope that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be forever. Camila didn't open the envelope for days. She tucked it between books, like someone hiding a wound that still pulsed beneath the skin. Part of her feared reliving old pains. Another part, stronger but equally guarded, didn't want to allow herself to dream again. But there was something different about that gesture. For the first time, Caio hadn't tried to win her over with gifts, power, or empty speeches. He had simply written, by hand, with his soul, with the heart he finally had the courage to expose. When she finally opened it, it was a quiet Sunday afternoon, with sunlight filtering softly through the window of her new apartment. And as she read, the words began to dissolve the hurt, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. Caio spoke of everything, the mistakes, the silences, the pride. He shared wounds he had never told anyone. He confessed how, as a child, he had been taught that vulnerability was weakness, that crying was shameful, that loving was dangerous. And so, he became a man of steel. But Camila, with her quiet strength, had shattered all of that. She showed him that true courage is loving without any guarantee of return. That real strength is keeping your dignity even when the world tries to crush you. And in between every line, he confessed that he didn't want to win her back. He wanted to become someone worthy of her. Camila cried quietly, not tears of pain, but of release, because for the first time she felt truly seen, not as a symbol, not as a challenge, but as a woman, with her pain, her strength, her unique beauty. And she knew then that the decision had to be hers, not out of loneliness, not out of pity, but out of conscious choice. So she chose to write back, not a romantic reply, but an invitation, a beginning. By the end of that week, she scheduled a meeting, a neutral place, a quiet cafe, far from the spotlight. Caio arrived first. He looked different, not in his suit or his hair, but in his eyes, calmer, softer, more human. When he saw her, he stood, didn't reach out, didn't flash a grand smile. He simply looked at her, with the respect of a man who now understood that true love only happens when two people meet fully ready. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I needed to hear you," she replied. "But now, you need to listen too." And Camila spoke, firmly, tenderly, clearly. She said she no longer wanted halfway love. She wouldn't accept being loved in the shadows. That if they were to begin again, it had to be from zero, with truth, with presence, with courage. And he, his eyes glistening, simply answered, "I don't want you to come back to me." She frowned, surprised. "I want to come to you, wherever you are, at your pace, on your terms, because I don't want someone beside me. I want someone walking with me. And if that someone is you, I won't give up." It was the first time she saw him truly naked, not in body, but in soul, and it disarmed her. His trembling hand inched closer to hers across the table. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold it either. She let it stay there, like a silent promise. In the days that followed, they began to meet regularly, without rush, without labels. Caio learned to listen, to ask, to respect her pain without trying to fix it, to introduce Camila not as a former employee, but as a woman, as a partner, and that made all the difference. She started to see him not as the man who once disappointed her, but as the man who had the courage to rebuild himself, for her, and for himself. The day of their full reconciliation came like a whisper. They were sitting on a bench in the park, hands loosely entwined. He turned to her and said, "If I ask you to stay forever, will you?" And she smiled, a full, beautiful, radiant smile. "If it's by your side, without masks, I will." There, with no flashes, no audience, just two wounded hearts, they decided to begin again, with everything they'd learned, everything they'd lost, and everything they finally understood. The invitation arrived quietly. No pomp, no golden foil, no family crest, just plain white, elegant, with simple letters. Camila and Caio. Because when love is real, it changes everything. Many doubted, others stayed silent, but everyone knew. This wedding wasn't just a union. It was a rupture, a declaration, a brave scream in a world that, for so long, tried to silence the voices of the unlikely. Camila and Caio weren't just getting married. They were standing before everyone, before themselves, before history, to prove that true love exists, that it survives, that it wins, when it is chosen, protected, and reborn with truth. The ceremony took place in a wide garden, surrounded by century-old trees, hanging lights like constellations, and a wooden path over a calm lake. Camila appeared in the distance, walking alone, wearing the most elegant dress she had ever worn. Not because it was expensive, but because it reflected everything she had become. Radiant, strong, peaceful. The dress was white, but in every detail, it carried the symbolism of her ancestry. Handmade embroidery crafted by black women from a social project she herself had founded. Her hair loose with a golden root-shaped adornment. Camila wasn't trying to look like someone else. She was, finally, being seen for exactly who she had always been. Caio waited for her with tears in his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them, because now he knew that emotion is not weakness, that crying is not defeat, that showing love is, in fact, the noblest form of strength. He wore a deep blue suit, no tie, his collar open, no ostentation, no armor, just the man she loved, finally free from pride. When she approached, he extended his hand. She took it, and in that touch lived the entire journey they had walked. All the pain, all the growth, all the transformation. The vows weren't memorized. They were spoken with the voice of the heart. Caio went first. He said that for so long, he believed love was dangerous, that he trusted the wrong people, that he locked himself in a castle built of money, fear, and control, but that she, with her silence, her integrity, her courage, had taught him how to love for the very first time. He didn't promise perfection, but he promised presence, support, truth, always. Camila took a deep breath, and she said that for years, she believed she would never be fully loved. That, at best, she'd be someone's hidden fling, a passing curiosity, a forbidden desire, but that he, despite all his mistakes, had the courage to change, and for that reason, she chose to stay. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, and now they would walk side by side, as equals, as mirrors recognizing one another, as a love that cannot be explained, only felt. When they exchanged rings, the audience couldn't hold back tears. Executives were there, former co-workers, family members. Even Caio Ferraz, his mother, was present. Quiet, changed as well. Because when love is real, it doesn't just transform the lovers, it transforms everything around them. And in that moment, it didn't matter what people had said, what they doubted, what they tried to stop. What existed there was bigger, eternal, love. After the I do, Camila and Caio embraced like two souls finding each other again for the first time, like two people who finally knew exactly where they belonged. The guests applauded, but their eyes were drawn to something greater than the kiss, greater than the dress or the setting. Their eyes were drawn to the strength of a woman who faced the world and won, to a man who reinvented himself and healed, to two hearts that, even broken, chose to mend themselves together, forever. And so this story ends, not as a fairy tale, but as a real love, one that hurt, fought, endured, and transformed.